Professionals who desire to work in American government and politics are always trying to figure out, how do I get in the game?
Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Others who are interested in advancing the political empowerment of the African American and Latino communities are always trying to figure out what are the best strategies we need to implement to accomplish our goals. Well, my guest, political strategist and operative, Larry Gonzalez, can provide advice in both areas. I'm sure you will enjoy our conversation today as Larry discusses his road to DC and what he thinks the African American and Latino communities must do to increase our political power and ultimately advance our mutual interests. Hi, Larry. Welcome to the Empowerment Zone.
How are you, Dr. Houston? So good to see you. It's been a minute. I know we've stayed in touch throughout the years, but I've always appreciated your innate sense of the importance of both of our communities, the Black and Brown communities, of working together. And it's been quite a journey. I mean, it's been almost 16, 17 years since I worked at NALEO and been doing all these other things that I know we'll be talking about. But so yeah, I would say we've known each other 2 decades. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's about right.
I mean, there clearly have been a couple of years here and there where, maybe we didn't connect, but it was, I guess it can be said like sort of old friends. When you see that email pop up, you get a smile on your face, and I'm so glad to hear from you. So.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, it's been about that time. I finished my doctorate degree from the University of Texas in 2000. And right after that, that's when I started getting involved with NALEO, National Association of Latino Elected Officials, and was going there consistently for a while, as well as many of the organizations founded by African Americans. And we always cross paths in the Latino organization.
I was the director of NALEO's Washington office from 1999 to 2006. So that's where we really saw a lot of each other at various events.
Right. And then the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. I know I saw you at the United States Hispanic Leadership Institute conference a few times. And it's been...
Ramona, I can't account for the number of conferences, summer conferences, and rubber chicken circuits that I think we've all done, of all the various Black and Brown civil rights organizations, but all longtime friends, and they're all out there doing important work. So it's important for us as leaders to stay in touch with those leaders and continue a dialogue moving forward. So always happy to go somewhere during the summer hot for a 3-day conference to talk policy.
Yes. And I'm excited to talk specifically with you because you are just so grounded, so connected, so vigilant about the political empowerment of the Latino community as well as other communities. And really want to get your perspective on what's going on today and what we need to do today as the African American and Latino communities move America even further forward, if you will. We're always behind pushing the country forward versus those of our American colleagues who want to push us backwards or take us backwards, not necessarily push us backwards. But can you begin by telling me a little bit about your background and how you got into politics and government and really working in the area of government affairs and political empowerment?
Sure. This might not be too much of a surprise to some of your listeners, but I kind of stumbled into it. Or those younger folks who listen to other people, and I know that I was always intrigued at a younger age, like, how did you get to where you got to? How did it happen? There is always been a certain amount of luck. Although, there was a famous golfer who once said, the harder I work, the luckier I get, right? And so I guess working under that sort of concept, just graduated from college. I will say that I'm Mexican American, so I was about to use the term militant, which I think maybe would be a little bit too much, but I was just resistant to having other folks' help, and I always had an attitude. And this is in the city of Chicago. I grew up. I was the first generation Mexican American, first to graduate in my family, that graduate college. Again, not a unique story in the Latino community, in the Mexican community, but just always had sort of a proud chip on my shoulder that I don't need help. I don't need to know how to network. I can do this on my own. And then, you start to run into some barriers based on your last name. And then you suddenly realize, well, maybe I do. And just was, lucky to run into some folks that steered me in the right direction, said, you should go to this reception and meet this person. And I was able to do that. And at that time, they had started something called, in the city of Chicago, the Spanish Coalition Jobs. And it was an effort to really put the pressure on corporate America, hold them accountable to ensuring a diverse workforce, at least from the Latino community. And so I was able to get some opportunities with some internships, and then ultimately got a job that I didn't stay in because I have a degree in journalism, actually a double degree in journalism and English, really, and always enjoyed English literature. Strange, the liberal arts background actually has served me very well in my current career. But anyway, long story, didn't get in this job, which was with corporate America. And then a cousin of mine said, hey, this local person is going to run for a city council position. I can't promise you anything. Just come by on a Saturday. And I said, okay, my interest was piqued, and I went by and started by just sort of putting letters in envelopes. But listen, I always had this love, which I believe reverts back to my liberal arts background, a curiosity, reading literature, understanding intent, character, all of these various things that you learn in a liberal arts education from reading so many masterworks and books and so forth. And then also with the journalism piece, for me, that's where the curiosity, right? I guess most journalists are curious about people. What are their motivations? What are their inner drives? Why do they do the things? Maybe even a bit of psychology. My first 2 years, I was a psychology major. Again, for the young people listening, I don't know how many times perhaps you end up changing, what you want to do with your life, but I was always interested and intrigued by that piece too, sort of the study of people and understanding, their issues and their motivation. So from that city council experience, I kind of got the bug. I was like, wow, the political process is pretty interesting. I was able to go out with the candidate to a number of events and excited by, the crowds and the speeches. And then from that generated an additional opportunity where I was put into a much larger position based on that. And that candidate discovered that I had some writing skills based on my journalism English background. So I started writing speeches and started putting a lot of things together, reporting directly to the campaign manager. And that's it. I was hooked after that. It was the first time that they had created what are called single member districts, right, in the city of Chicago, in the county and at the state level. Before, it had been sort of at large, and it was very difficult for people of color to get elected under those systems. So with the single member, that meant they created the majority minority districts based on Black voter patterns and Latino voting patterns, and got with a candidate who was able to win election for the first time against the powers that be. We're talking about the city of Chicago here, so we're talking about political machines, Boss Daley and all of those days, 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. And it was exciting. It was an exciting time in my life to be involved in something like that. And from there, a couple other folks, noticed the work that I did and my writing skills. And I ended up working in the Illinois State Senate for, this is a total, this is where life takes you. He's now a Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia from Illinois, 4th Congressional District. He has succeeded Congressman Luis Gutierrez. I worked for him. He was first elected in 1993 as a state senator, again, under the single member district opportunity. And I worked for him for almost 5 years. Used to have to drive from Chicago to Springfield every week while we were in session. They put us up in a hotel room with staffers. So it was really just a great experience to make that transfer from my first experiences in politics. Now all of a sudden I'm in policy, right? Now I'm a staffer, staffing at that time the only two Latino state legislators in Illinois, in the state Senate. And so just a lot of work, to staff both of them. And one represented the north side and the other one represented the south side of Chicago. So my car's got a lot of miles on it during that period, but it was, again, just so much fun to be involved in all of the things that were happening in the city of Chicago, the development of the Latino community, the growth and maturation of the community. At that time, most of the discussion was around, the growth, of course, of the Black community and its role in the future of the city of Chicago and the growth. In fact, again, history repeats itself. There's a bit of a battle right now in the city council over a redistricting map that the Black city council members and the Latino city council members are arguing over. It's really based on one seat and who should have more. And the large portion of the growth in the city really has been because of the Latino community. But we can get into that if you want, but I'll let them figure that out. But there is some underlying tension. So it's just, again, sort of how history repeats itself. There's always been some level of political tension in the city as folks sort of saw the future, what it would look like. And from there, I just, again, unfortunately in 1998, while I was still working for then State Senator Garcia, he lost his reelection effort. The political machine came after him as he grew in power and stature and was bringing others, was starting to build a political bench. He lost, and it was a shock to all of us. I went to work temporarily for Cook County Clerk David Orr, was very much a progressive champion and hero. And then out of left field, I got a call asking me if I would consider moving to Washington, D.C. to run the organization that we talked about, the National Association of Latino Elected Appointed Officials, the D.C. office. And honestly, my initial reaction was, no way, I'll never leave Chicago. I love the city. It's the greatest city in the world. Sorry for those others who are listening from other cities. And so, at the time, my mom was sick too, so there were some personal things going on, but they were persistent and they called, 2 and 3 times. And by the third time I did take the interview with the executive recruiter, and the rest is sort of my history. Next thing I knew, 2 weeks later, I was in my car driving 700 miles from Chicago to DC. And I've been here ever since 1999 is when I arrived. And it's been sort of like the blink of an eye. But that experience itself, it really, if you sort of see the stats, and this is how I talk to some of the younger folks on Capitol Hill when they asked about sort of the arc of my career and how it happened. Yes, I absolutely feel blessed and grateful, but yes, there's a bit of luck, but you still have to be in the right places at the right time. You have to interject yourself in what I call sort of the loop of either information or networking. And that is some of the things that I've learned from my mentors. It's like, if you're not in the game, like even today, Senator Menendez talked about, if I'm not in that room, who's talking about the issues, that matter to our community? And I think it's the same way. If you're not in the middle of that network, how are you connecting with people, and how do you know who can help you or what you can do for them in return? And you can learn pretty quickly, especially in politics. It's very much a transactional profession, but that's okay. I mean, you learn to give and you learn to take a little bit, and hopefully it all works out for you in the end. And so, as I said, I did NALEO for 7 years, ran the DC office, and that position was pivotal for me in the sense of it utilized all of the skills I had learned up to that point. So I mentioned I was a journalist, but I also learned, how to communicate. And so doing things like this, talking to you or going on radio interview. I did a lot of television, which was quite nerve-wracking the first few times I ever had to do that, especially I still tell some of my friends that I actually did Fox News a number of times on immigration, no less, because they love to have the punching bag, so they'd be like, hey, let's ask this Gonzalez guy to come in and we'll kick him around for a few minutes on the show. But I think that our board members at NALEO, who were always, we always had a bipartisan board of Republican and Democratic elected officials, appreciated that we weren't shy about going on and saying our piece and standing up for immigrants and so forth. So that just really gave me quite an opportunity to blossom in so many different ways on the communications level, visibility. Even though I never actually worked on Capitol Hill, by virtue of the position at LAO, I was on the Hill every day, right? Interacting with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, particularly members who were seeing this huge growth of the Latino community in their districts that needed help, right? Understanding messaging, what's the community about, how can I work better with this community, citizenship efforts, especially like in the city of Houston. Now they always had an office. I think you probably engage or experience like some of the citizenship ceremonies or the weekend workshops that would help people go through the citizenship process. And so all of that stuff was so important to be able to engage and offer something to members. So it was a little easier conversation versus, we're against you because you're not with us on a particular issue. Those were always sort of goodwill efforts. And yeah, it just set me up for success for the next level, which is where I am now. As I always say, I'm an anomaly in DC. I've only had 2 jobs, blessed or not blessed. But I think in DC, this, people tend to be a little bit more job hopper, thinking, the next best thing is around the corner. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So the fact that I've only had 2 jobs in the 20 plus years that I've been here, I think is pretty amazing. But it led me to meet a gentleman by the name of Robert Rabin, who was fresh off of a political appointment with President Clinton. He served as an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice under President Clinton. And as he likes to say, because you serve at the pleasure of the president, when Clinton left, he was looking for a job and decided that he could do some consulting. And 1 client turned into 2, and 2 turned into 4, and 4 turned into 8. So he needed help. And he started reaching out to different folks. But he always had a vision about the Black community, the Latino community, and about having a diverse kind of firm. And he's accomplished that. And so through a mutual friend, he introduced me, and we met on Capitol Hill, and we immediately hit it off and said, this is the firm I've created, and I'd love for you to be a part of the original folks that we bring on. And I was able to do that, and been there ever since. When I came on board, I think I was either the 9th or 10th person hired at the firm. Our firm is now 110 people.
Oh, wow.
And so, we're all over the country. We have an office in El Paso, Texas, and California, a small one in New York. We have some outposts of individuals, but mostly because Robert Rabin has been very flexible about where people want to work, and especially when they're already in those communities, there's all sorts of needs, right? We have somebody in Detroit, like, hey, they understand that community. There's a huge growth of the Latino community. She's African American. She's doing a lot of wonderful work on the ground on behalf of our clients in Detroit. So it has been a journey. Probably the understatement of the year, but I've loved every minute of it. I think the beauty of what I do is it's no day is ever the same. Chicago still don't really understand what I do for a living, but they, particularly people who have a distaste for politics don't fully understand, like, oh, how could you do that all the day with those politicians? And I honestly, when people ask me, I don't know what it is, but I try to find the genuineness or the real person. Yes, you're always wary of, people make promises, but that's in any business. I think you see all these negatives, right, about DC, this, that, and the other thing. But you're going to tell me that doesn't exist in corporate America? If you worked at, some Fortune 100 company, that there's not backstabbing or somebody trying to step over to you, become senior VP or whatever. I mean, it's all relative. I do enjoy the interaction with members. In fact, I came back from a weekend getaway with one of the members who, I've enjoyed the actual friendship over the years. And, it was a fundraiser, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And we brought together 30 to 40 people from different industries. But it was interesting, to meet all these people and listen to the member and other members of Congress sort of have a little better opportunity to interact with them rather than chasing them down the hallway, on Capitol Hill, where you get, maybe a minute and a half to 2 minutes to be able to talk to them. So I love the interaction. I still really mostly focus on the Hispanic caucus and the work that I do on behalf of clients. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. I do a lot of different things. My legislative portfolio of clients that I represent is a little bit all over the place. There's no people ask me, well, what do you specialize in? I said, I don't specialize in anything. So I do. Well, no, I mean, that was my goal. So one of the reasons when I left NALEO was sort of like, okay, I did the political empowerment thing, and now I want to do the economic piece for the Latino community because money talks. I mean, if we've learned anything, like this is something I learned during my political days in the city of Chicago. It's like, do you learn to play their game? And I'm using their as those the people that hold the power. And in the city of Chicago, it's been the Irish and the Italians, or you make your own rules, which of course you want to make some of those, but in order to get that power, you have to learn how to play their game and beat them at it. And so even though, of course, Chicago is a Democratic city, so you have to be a Democrat to get anywhere, but it was tough overcoming, what was a machine, and it's long gone now, but there's, I guess, still remnants of it here and there. But you learned that in Washington as well, sort of, how do we empower ourselves? I mean, you see right now the difference between the Congressional Black Caucus. I think there's 57 members, 58 members of the CBC now. CHC, as of this show, is 39. There's probably a couple of opportunities, and we can talk a little bit more if you'd like about sort of the opportunities and how that would the interplay between the Black and Brown communities coming up here in the upcoming elections. But there's going to be some opportunities for the CHC to grow because of the new map.
Right.
In fact, in Illinois, there's one very specifically. It's a second. It's not actually a majority Latino. It's about 49% Latino. But when you add African Americans and others, it's a majority minority district. So it's like a Latino plurality. And it's Illinois Congressional 3. And it was created, unfortunately, at the expense of two non-members of color, Sean Cason and Marie Newman, who now have to run against each other, two Democrats. But it was long in the making. There were stepped up locally to say we should. I mean, because they only had the one seat in the entire Midwest for what we had it there since 1992. That was when the Illinois' 4th congressional district was created, right? So 30 years later, here they finally get another seat or an opportunity at least to elect someone of their choice. So that's kind of where we're at. I apologize, I was a bit long-winded, but it has been quite a journey. I've really appreciated every moment of it, and so yeah, just never think you can do it on your own. At least in this business, anyway. Because this business, no matter what you think of it, it's a people business. You got to know people who know people. I was gonna bust into a Barbra Streisand song. We're the luckiest people in the world. But it's yeah, I mean, this is absolutely a people business first, and you have to get to know folks and have your business cards ready and to go.
Yeah, relationships are key in any field, really, but particularly in government and politics and in working. It's interesting to hear how you stated you fell into this profession, but then it became a profession that you loved, right?
Right.
And that it utilized all your special gifts and abilities. It engaged all of them. You talked about people having to intersect themselves into both the networking, which is relationships, and the information. What did you mean by information?
So I guess I meant information more of the profession I'm in now. I mean, I'm successful in what I do now because I'm in the flow of information, right? And really, even when you're trying to break in, it's how you learn about what things are happening and when. So it's the information that is, and it doesn't really matter where you live. I mean, urban, maybe a little bit more so, if you're in a rural area, it's probably tough where you're going to have to travel to some urban areas, perhaps to break in the kind of profession that I'm in. But it is about gathering information and figuring out what you want to do. Who are the bright people? Who are the local leaders? How is it happening? When are the next events? And that's how you learn to interject yourself into that networking circle. I guess I think of it now for me is information is power. It's everything right now, right? That's my value to my clients. If I'm not gathering, like today, an 8-hour, 8 to 10 hour workday I spent talking to staffers, emailing staffers, on the committees, the key committees, finding out, what's your boss going to do with this bill? Are they going to vote for it? Are they going to introduce it? Why is it happening? What's their motivation? Oh, I didn't know that other member was on the bill. Oh, that's good to know. And I got to call the other member staff. So it's gathering information and then offering, I guess the other word for it is intel in our business, right? Who's got the intel?
Right.
And so it's extremely, extremely valuable. It's a commodity here in Washington and really anywhere. Even, local city council, mayoral races, up and down the line. It's always important to know who's who and what's what and why and when it's happening and how.
So now let's look at. Thank you for telling your professional trajectory into this business of political empowerment. What is your take on what is going on today in terms of the empowerment of the Latino community, and also looking at the relationship between the Latino and African American communities in terms of political empowerment? Are we working together? Are we not? Are we competing against each other? What's going on individually as a community and collectively as Black and Brown people?
Yeah, no, those are all such very, very important questions moving forward, particularly in the larger urban areas of America. And again, want to really praise your leadership and your insight in this area. When not a lot of people were talking about it, you've taken this on, and the studies and trying to talk to folks, ensuring that both sides are talking to each other. And if we're not, why aren't we? I think it's kind of gone by the wayside, honestly. It pops up usually, prior to elections, or it's more acute during redistricting when people are drawing maps, because that's about political power. Who's going to be left in? Who's going to get kicked out? Who's going to have a harder time getting reelected? For example, in California now, you have a mayoral race coming up. I'm not there. I'm not on the ground, so a lot of what I hear is secondhand. But it was always my impression that Karen Bass, who is a member of Congress, former leader of the state house in California, was the front runner. Now, of course, you see this billionaire who's spending all sorts of millions of white billionaires spend millions of dollars to get ahead. But I was always under the impression that she was the front runner and would be the next mayor. And what were the implications for a city that's really dominated by Latinos? And the African American population numbers are dwindling. You see it less and less in terms of the actual political power. However, there have been, deals made and deals cut to ensure continued Black representation, albeit as shrinking as it may be, but it's indicative of the population numbers. So, whether that still happens, who knows? But I think that would be a really good case study to sort of see how that plays out. Because I think prior to her, well, who was the I'm blanking on. There was a previous African American mayor, probably 30 years ago, wasn't it? At least, because you've had, so Garcetti is now. Before him was who was Villaraigosa for 2 terms. I don't know my LA mayors. I can't ask Alex Trebek from Jeopardy to take LA mayors for 100 here. But anyway, the point being is California is an interesting case study of how Black and Latino elected officials have been able to, and somebody's probably going to call in next week or send you emails. That man had it wrong. But from my outside perspective, it seems like there has been a level of cooperation and discussions in these communities to say it's in our best interest to have these kinds of conversations. And they're going to be bad. They're not going to be comfortable kinds of conversations because it's about political power. However, here's what we think we can do so that we can ensure that you still have political representation that's necessary, and what we have is reflective of the growth of our community as well. So, Representative Maxine Waters sits in a congressional district that I believe is a Latino majority district now. The growth, when people talk about Compton, they always say, Black community, right? Has anybody gone there to see how many Latinos are in Compton? So, and you can point to, Sheila Jackson Lee in Houston. That's a Latino majority district. I know Al Green in the Houston area. He has a lot of Latinos in his district, and on and on and on. Now long retired Congressman Gene Green, who was white, represented the Houston area for decades. and that was the Latino majority district, right? And people consistently complained they never did anything about it by actually building a bench of viable candidates. And Gene served the community, right? So I think, this issue with, Mayor Lightfoot, that's always can be a lightning rod, between Blacks and Latinos. Other cities for sure, Atlanta's still very much African American and Black dominated, but the Latino community is growing leaps and bounds there. I still think in terms of Atlanta as a city, it's probably decades away from the kind of empowerment folks would want to see, but in the suburban areas where a lot of those, we were talking about Georgia 2 decades ago, and I was at LA saying there were textile plants and there was an immigrant, people were coming from Mexico to work those jobs, and now they've all become citizens and are voting and are homeowners, and on and on and on 2 decades later. So it's developing everywhere. And so this idea of the elected leaders, the civil rights leaders, whoever you want to bring together to the table should be at a table talking about what the future looks like, and not falling prey to what the powers that be, those currently in power or angling for power, want our communities to be fighting. And I don't live in a, I don't want to be naive sounding. It's, again, I'll go back to, they are comfortable conversations because it's about political power, but there are ways, and we've seen success stories where we already live alongside each other in so many communities across the country, but how can we be sharing the resources and this kind of political power to get where we want to go, to make sure people have, all the things that they need, affordable housing, good schools, et cetera. One of my proudest policy moments going back to Naleo was, this idea around voting rights was so big after George Floyd and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and which ultimately didn't get passed. But when the last round of reauthorization for the Voting Rights Act, it was groups like the National Urban League and the NAACP and others that stepped up around the Spanish language ballot provision. Without their support, there were a lot of Republicans that were out there that, absolutely wanted to eliminate that provision, which would have profoundly impacted the Latino vote and their ability to cast ballots without that support. And so I always point to those kinds of things where when folks work together, it's, the sky is the limit as to what can be accomplished. And frankly, both of our communities have been soundly hurt by what's happened, with the elimination of provisions of the Voting Rights Act and what's going to happen. Oh my God, don't get me started on Florida. It's
right.
going to be really, really bad news for after, two Black members getting redistricted out.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's going to be, and then, disinformation. And so give me a lighter question, right? bring the crowd back up there.
Well, I guess one of the questions I want to ask you, considering your knowledge and experience in working within the Latino community and the African American community and the Tri-Caucus, what do you think, if you could give one piece of advice for us in terms of advancing our agendas? And mind you, as marginalized communities, there are some issues that we all support, right? And then there's some issues that are distinctly characteristic of our communities, but we do need to come together in terms of advancing our agendas as a whole, as a collective.
That's right.
Do you have, if you had all the leaders in one room, national leaders, local leaders, what one piece of advice would you give to, if you could get everybody on the same page to advance our agendas, what would it be?
I think you actually know the answer to that, but I would, reiterate, and that is keep it simple. I think there are just, one or two, maybe three. There's more, but I'm saying if you keep it to those things. So one of the things I always tout is when you start to count the Tri-Caucus. So I mentioned earlier with 58, 59 members of CBC, 39 of THC, another 30, 25 to 30, maybe K-Pack. I mean, you're talking about well over 100 votes, 110,
Correct.
115 votes in the Tri-Caucus. I mean, that's a quarter, more than a quarter of the House of Representatives. And so you have a serious opportunity to make some things happen, you know, within that context, or make or break pieces of legislation as long as you stick together. And so, you know, affordable housing and economic related issues. I mean, without any of these economic, and I stand by that, as I mentioned earlier, I felt like I had made an impact on political empowerment, and the economic piece for the Latino community was so important because people weren't going to pay attention to us if we're still sort of stuck in this negative data loop of, you know, oh, lowest salaries and, you know, don't own anything. And we're not in the stock market. And to be sure, a lot of that is still true, but we have made strides. You know, fastest growing sector of small business owners are Latinas, women in the country. And so, and our Hispanic business owners. So when we focus on these kinds of issues, the economic, the bread and butter, and don't get distracted by some of this other stuff. And maybe that sounds negative, you know, other policy issues are not a distraction, but just really put together an agenda. What is it? It's jobs, it's affordable housing, it's education. That's it, right? And we're just going to hammer those for the next decade and see where we're at, see if we've moved the needle. And I guarantee we'll have moved the needle. I think particularly for our communities, the education piece is like, you know, I know everyone out there listening knows that, but it just always needs to be said, I think, because without that to fall back on, you know, what's happening in the Latino community is you see Latinas getting ahead of the males of Latinos, which is very similar, right? In the Latino, in the African American community.
Yes.
And so a similar pattern where they're graduating, getting their degrees. And so that's troubling. And these are the kinds of things that we need to address. So I think that's it. And I know that's difficult for policymakers because they're getting hit at all sides, like, oh, this happened and we got to take care of this. But like, I don't know, separate task forces. And I think it's been, you know, attempted before, but stay on it, and just those three issues, and hammer it and get stuff passed. So, you know,
that's a challenge, like you said, keeping it simple, because there's so many issues that face our communities. It's hard to focus on the three that you said: education, jobs, and affordable housing, because we have so many other issues we want to deal with, right? Criminal justice, all of this,
voting,
voting. It's so many factors, and all of them are interrelated. But like you stated, if we could just focus and keep it simple for a decade, we could really move the needle. And I think that's kind of, when you look historically at our communities, and look, like, for example, in the African American community, all the energy at one point in time in our era was ending slavery, right? That was the focal point, and we were able to end it. And then here you go with segregation and Jim Crow, end it. But now it's very challenging.
And voting rights.
You're right. Voting rights. And now it's those three eras, and now it's very difficult for our communities to really focus on one thing, because there's so many that are so relevant to the empowerment of our community.
I mean, there's also a disconnect that, you know, we're dealing with of the broader public, and, you know, people sour on, you know, what Congress can actually get done. And that's, you know, that's a fair perception of, you know, what's the congressional rate of approval is usually around 9%, 11%. But I guess when you look at it from a perspective of the value of having somebody like a Maxine Waters as the chair of arguably one of the most powerful committees in the United States House of Representatives, the Financial Services Committee, and the number of members of color on that committee, you know, there's, I think, 5 or 6 CHC members and at least that many CBC members. Those are the voices of the people that are represented on that committee when you talk about economic related issues. Why are banks charging overdraft fees? Why are they doing these things to our community? Why aren't they lending more? And these are all pathways to the kinds of policies that are very, very important to the future, you know, empowerment of our community and allowing people to get access to capital and all of those things. So Without that, I think we're having an even more difficult conversation. So we need more of that. We need, I mean, it looks as if, unfortunately, the power structure may flip here in November. I'm still optimistic that it doesn't, but we'll see what happens. But either way, seeing people of color leading these various committees is something that's relatively new, right? Only over the last 4 to 6 years, where you've seen CBC members, CHC members leading committees and/or subcommittees, and that's a really, really important thing because they set the agenda, they set the policy agenda on those issues. Climate change. I realize how important climate change is to Latinos. I don't know that it registers. You would know better than I do in terms of the polling of African American voters, but it's a huge issue for Latinos, climate change. Right? It really moves the needle, particularly in the Southwest. No surprise, we have much more open land and people being concerned about, we're all concerned about breathing, clean air, but I think it's more so out in those communities where you have large, Latino populations, but it's a extremely critical policy issue to many Latinos across the country.
Yes, so climate change and keeping it simple, education, jobs, and housing.
Yeah, I mean, and look, we have to overcome it because, we could fill up probably 10 of your next shows talking about the horrible pieces of disinformation that are going on. With the Latino community, you have, the Spanish language piece, and then it becomes even more difficult because the disinformation purveyors have infiltrated, radio and television and YouTube and all these other places, and just sending bad information to people. Radio is a big deal for Latino voters also. They get a lot of information, particularly those whose language, English, is not their first language. And so it's a serious, serious concern for the community.
So, we're big supporters here at the Empowerment Zone of higher education. And I know you attended college, and we want to know what your strategies are for college success. So could you tell us, where did you attend college? What were your major or majors, and what was your degree?
Sure.
And then what is that strategy you would give us?
Yeah, I honestly, Dr. Houston, I think my strategy will go back to the same strategy I had as far as how I got into politics. I mean, I guess I should be a little bit fairer to myself. I did want to go to college. I knew that I wanted to go to college, but I just didn't have any mentors. Neither of my parents. In fact, one of my parents never graduated high school. The other did get her high school diploma. And so even they were surprised. And I know that they felt bad about not being able to give me the kind of advice that was necessary. And so it was, trial and error. I ended up going to Western Illinois University, which is on the border of Iowa and Illinois. And I went there because it was, again, talking about changing majors. I wanted to go into business. It was known as a business school. That didn't last very long. Then, like I said, psychology, and then ultimately, got journalism and English. But I didn't really have a strategy, but I knew in my mind that I wanted to go and that I was determined to go. So that was a piece of it. And honestly, Ramona, the environment had a lot to do. The environment that I was in, there were a lot of people going. I think about it now, if I had grown up maybe in a little different environment, say where my parents grew up, I may not have gone, right? Sorry, my son just stepped in there for a second. So yeah, I guess if there was a strategy, it's just be determined that you're going to go.
That's it.
And I was determined, and I found out what I needed to find out, and ended up going and graduated and went on from there. So if first and foremost, it has to come from within you that you're determined you're going to go, one way or another.
That's it. You have to make the decision, if you will, to go.
And you have to see value. I know a lot of young people that I talk to now, they just be like, why am I going to incur all this debt? And, and what's it really going to get me? Oh, when I encourage them to come to Capitol Hill, they go, for what? For a $28,000 a year job, $30,000 a year job, when I just spent $120,000
Yep.
on my education.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so
There's
the
an
hill
investment.
the hill is still a rich people's game, I guess, to a certain extent, So.
Yeah, but we still got to work our way through it. Education is important, and like you said, you at least the first step is to make it is that you want to go to college and making it happen. Thank you for that great advice.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song, NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.